lovely to see a lot of familiar name and faces. Welcome, everybody. And all right. Okay, so I guess we can get started. So good afternoon from Michigan. Welcome to the alumni panel for our annual Translate-a-Thon. We're coming to you live from the Language Resource Center here at the University of Michigan. We are very thrilled to see everyone and are really looking forward to the session. And just a quick note that the session is being recorded, as you see just now, and we will share the video afterwards. And also a reminder that please help us out by keeping your mic muted throughout the discussion. But before we officially start, I would love if you can briefly turn on your camera to give our panelists and each other a hi, if you would. If you can, turn on your camera and wave hi so that we are feeling more closer together. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate that. Thank you. So we will soon get the panel started, but just a note that we will open up for a Q&A after the panel wraps up. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat now or anytime, or you have a chance to ask them live when the time comes. So now I'd like to pass the mic to our director, Julie, to get the panel started.
Thank you, Mia. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Julie Evershed. I'm the director of the Language Resource Center, and I am so very excited to bring this panel of U of M alumni back to campus virtually to discuss their experiences with language and translation. They have all participated in Translate-a-Thon in the past, amongst various other activities, and contributed to translation in significant ways. We are so lucky to be able to bring them together this afternoon. And we only have an hour, so I'm going to keep it short and end here and turn it over to John, who will moderate the session.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, my name is John Beals. I work here in the Language Resource Center as an educational technologist. So I think we're going to get started first with some brief introductions for our panelists, and I'm going to start with Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, John. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Translate-a-Thon. I'm really delighted to be back virtually, and I believe this is my fourth Translate-a-Thon. So yeah, or third. I don't even know, but yeah, it's been a while. Always happy to be back and to see some familiar faces. So yeah, I graduated from U of M in 2022. I did a major in international studies and a double minor in Latin American and translation studies. So shout out to the comparative literature department. They're watching us this afternoon. And I work primarily with English and Spanish, and especially the connection between translation and social justice and immigrant justice. So I see really two strands of my work, one in legal translation for organizations like Freedom House, the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, and the Immigrant Justice Lab initiative at U of M. And also in the public humanities sphere, collaborated with the Department of Comparative Literature on the Translating Michigan project, highlighting multilingualism across our state, and also have very minimal experience on freelance projects. And yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Manuel. So next, we're going to go to Peter.
Hello, everyone. I first must preface with my internet is going crazy right now. So if I am unclear, I apologize in advance. But hello, everyone. Like Emmanuel, I've participated in a few Translate-a-Thons. It's a great activity, so I'm glad all these people could join. I graduated from the university in 2023 with a double major in comparative literature and international studies, as well as a minor in translation. So again, like I said, hello, conflict department. I hope you're all doing well. I grew up just fascinated by language, like, you know, most children of immigrants. You speak two languages, you translate sometimes for your parents. But it was in high school where I kind of actually got into it. So I started studying lots of different languages. And then I got to U of M, and I was so lucky to be able to matriculate into the residential college. And so I got to participate in both their intensive Spanish and French programs. So also hello, Dominique, because I saw you join earlier. And I was also able to take some Portuguese or a Portuguese class, and I was able to start learning Standard Arabic, which was a dialect that I spoke, and participate in activities like Translate-a-Thon, which my languages have opened up a lot of opportunities for me. I was able to study abroad, work abroad. I'm currently working abroad. I was able to work with refugees and immigrants in the US as well. And now I can also continue sharing my love for languages because I'm now a lecturer of legal English at a university in France. And so I'm teaching my students how to speak English. And hopefully, uh, but yeah, so that's a little bit of my background.
Great, thanks, Peter. And Kelsey.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Kelsey Trotta. I graduated from Michigan a long time ago. I majored in Spanish, and I took Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, French, and one Catalan class in college. I use what I learned every day. So shout out to the Romance Language Department. I see a couple of my professors. Hi, I still use everything you taught me. I currently work as a translator and interpreter. I focus mostly in media, marketing, and culinary translation. For the past 8 years, I was a legal translator and translated many asylum cases, many articles about social justice and about different social issues, both within Latin America and Europe and here. Um, and I think that's about it. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Okay, Omar.
Hi guys, thank you all for sharing. Emmanuel, Peter, it was Kelsey, right? I'm Omar. I am currently in the hospital where I work, and I'm on call, so if there's a code, I have to run. No way of getting out of these calls. But how did I end up here in Florida working at a hospital? Well, I graduated from Ann Arbor in 2016. I majored in comparative literature, Arabic and Spanish, and evolutionary anthropology, both great departments. And I did a minor in translation. I worked really closely with Julie and the language bank and the language resource center. I actually worked on a project that won $10,000 from Optimize. It's an online open source clinical translation guide. And then when I went on to medical school, I ended up using what I learned and worked as a medical interpreter. I paid for 3 years of med school doing that. And I don't usually say this, but because I guess this is the right stage to, I probably have worked more hours than anyone else ever at a U.S. med school while in med school. So that was a huge privilege working in the Detroit area for Arabic and Spanish-speaking communities, and of course my mother tongue, Urdu, as well. And I continue to use these languages on a daily basis as a doctor. So medicine is one of those fields where really patients you will encounter that don't know English, and so they rely on your language skills. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I am going to get started with the questions for our panelists. And the first question I have is for Peter and Kelsey. So beyond language fluency, what is the most valuable non-linguistic skill? For example, professionalism, tech literacy, critical thinking, something like that, that you think college students must master?
Kelsey, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think that there are two skills that are the most important. Number one is soft skills. Can you talk to people? Can you listen to them? Can you understand where they're coming from? And can you understand what they're trying to communicate to whom and why? And I think that a lot of that ties into critical thinking because when you use your critical thinking skills, those are questions that you're asking constantly. And when you cross-reference dictionaries, when you cross-reference forums, when you ask colleagues like different questions about not only words, but the meaning behind it, the critical thinking comes into play. But I think that both of them are equally as important. I forgot one more thing. Manners, saying please and thank you, learning how to have a firm handshake, and learning how to ask good questions, ask questions about people in their lives in general, and get to understand people. That's
Great, thanks. Peter?
I actually am in total agreement with Kelsey. I was actually going to list those soft skills and critical thinking as important, specifically those people skills. The lens that I look at it through, though, is a little different as the landscape of the job market is changing with the rise of AI. Of course, no one knows how far it will go, how much it will change. Um, but there is one thing that AI can never do, and that is be a person. And so as AI can recognize patterns and regurgitate things that humans have produced, or now that other AIs have produced, um, being able to master those people skills, as Kelsey said, listening to people, understanding their perspectives, understanding where they are coming from, and being able to connect with people personally is just, in my opinion, going to become a more important aspect of being able to advance personally in your life and professionally. Because at the end of the day, if AI can, let's say, eliminate some unknown amount of positions, and instead of needing 20 people to work on a team, they only need 5, and they have so many qualified candidates, at the end of the day, it will come down to the candidates that can understand the people that they're talking to and working with the most. And that also goes into critical thinking, as Kelsey was saying, because again, AI is very good at recognizing patterns, but it is not amazing at understanding context, at least currently, or understanding novel situations, because if something is novel and new, there's no pattern that it can recognize. So being able to really think critically, both in context and with the people who you're working with, understanding their emotions, their points of view, excuse me. I just believe that those two skills, those two aspects of um, human emotion, logic, are just going to be the biggest things going forward, especially for new college graduates trying to enter a workforce that is rapidly changing.
Great. So I think that's a good intro to the next question for Peter and Omar, which is your thoughts on the impact of AI and machine translation on your specific field and the essential technical skills that students might need to remain competitive.
Peter, you want to keep going or
I'll let you
should I go
go
first?
just while you're free and no one's called you yet.
I can actually hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said I'll let you go first while you're free and no one has called you for any
Thank you,
emergency.
Peter. Yes. So as far as my field, I can say that nothing replaces a human interpreter in the room. But more generally, I just think that humans trust humans. Um, and I don't want to be, I don't mean to be overly vague or like try to be. That's not like an unnecessarily deep statement. I just think it's a truism So one like hypothetical situation would be judges. You could train an AI to be in a courtroom. Judges could be completely impartial, or at least not be biased by human sensitivities, right? You could have an impartial AI judge that just looks at the evidence and considers both the defendant and the um, and the what's the name the well, yeah, both parties in the courtroom, their cases objectively, but no one would want their case decided by an AI judge. You always want the human deciding this. Likewise, I mean, honestly, the stuff I do as a doctor, AI could easily do, like, and it could do it better than I could. And that's, I mean, I think just part of the humility of just admitting that. Because I mean, we actually use like medical AIs to make decisions ourselves. But I think what a patient is really paying for when they come to the hospital is to have a human sign off on their treatment, to have that human touch. And I think the same applies to medical interpreting and interpreting more broadly. It's just we feel better about it when it's coming from a human. So I think um, that human interpretation will never be replaced just because we like and we trust that a human's doing it. So that's what I'd say.
Thanks. Peter?
Before I speak about what I was going to say, I really want to say that I agree with Omar, and I think part of that human aspect is also because at the end of the day, if there ever is an issue, we want to be able to have some kind of accountability. If something goes wrong or something is not done the way it's supposed to do, you cannot really hold an AI machine accountable for anything. Um, and so there is that, like, we are social creatures and we want to have that connection, as he was saying. But I also think there is this question of accountability. And, an AI will spit out the answer that it thinks is correct in the quickest way that it can. Whereas a human will really need to think about it and evaluate things once, twice, three times because they know one, there is error, and two, there's some accountability. But specifically, my thoughts are first, I know I'm not working specifically in translation, but my thoughts on just translation is that I think for a lot of people, and of course, Kelsey, who is working every day as a professional translator, might be able to correct me, but that translation might go more and more from sitting down and translating every single piece to more of proofing and editing what a machine might translate, evaluating, the style that a machine gives, or translating symbolism or cultural context, things that a machine might not pick up on. And then specifically in my current field, which comes to teaching languages, something that the rise of AI and machine translation, especially with regards to working in a language department, has been an issue of topic and debate this entire year, these past few months that I have been here. And honestly, in a way, we're reverting to some more traditional teaching or classroom methods, which involve spending more time working in the classroom, doing more handwritten work, trying to do as much off a screen as possible, doing less assignments at home and more assignments in class, more spontaneity. And it raises issues because sometimes, for example, we'll have students that will use AI to prepare some of their work, to prepare for their oral presentations, for example, to improve their English. But then you get into the question of them wanting to produce the best work and get the best grade, but then it's not actually reflective of their level of English. So finding out ways to actually figure out where they are, where to meet them, to balance, having as a teacher to give some sort of grade with trying to incentivize students to really try their best and work on their own to learn a language, and not just resort to using a machine to help them. And I just really want to say, and I'm sure, anyone who's teaching out here knows it really is a learning process. I mean, I'm learning as I go. There's so many things that I'm like, oh, next year, this is what I'll do differently so that I can avoid it or minimize the impact of AI on my students' works. Yes, do I know they're using it to some degree? I'm sure they all do. Have I been able to catch some of them? Yes, and then I have to give them a very stern warning. But trying to find ways to foolproof it, perhaps by saying, okay, you can bring notes to any oral presentation you have, but they all have to be handwritten. So if they really want to write out everything ChatGPT told them, they have to do it on maybe like a half sheet of paper. Perhaps printing out more paper and using things like Canvas, I believe. It's only been a few years, but I'm forgetting what I used as a student, but using things like Canvas less because printing out paper is still more environmentally friendly than the amount of power that AI is taking up. So just sometimes embracing tradition, as they say, to try to not counteract progress, but to make sure that people are still learning themselves and producing themselves and teaching them the value in human work and human knowledge and creativity.
I
Great.
really loved your answer, Peter, and you stuck to what you know. I should have stuck to what I know. I forgot that it's called a plaintiff and a defendant. It just goes to show. But yeah, so I mean that's another thing with interpreting. It's quite siloed. So medical interpreting is one thing, and it's good to know your limits. I've never done legal interpreting. That's a whole nother arena. But I use the analogy because I think this stuff holds, and everything that Peter talks about, I think holds across all these different professions or arenas.
Great. Thank you. I think that will be a good segue to
I think I saw
Yep,
Kelsey wanted to add something.
sure. Go for it.
Yeah, just to respond to your earlier comment, the question of what kind of role AI will play in the future remains to be seen. I've been talking with colleagues who have been in the industry for over 25 years, and they've seen kind of these revolutions of CAT tools, using electronic dictionaries, etc. But like you said, and like Omar also said, people need a human element. And I think that there's a lot that AI can do in some rights, but people will always be necessary no matter what.
Great. Thanks, Kelsey. So we were talking a little bit about, student work, classwork, and so I think that's a good intro to this question for Kelsey and Emmanuel about if a student in the audience is completely undecided about their future but knows they love languages, what is the single best action that they could take this semester to move toward a professional career?
Kelsey, do you want to go first?
I was about to say after you.
Oh, okay, I can go. So the one very basic thing that I came up with, which a lot of us are here to do, is to volunteer. I think a lot of the translation experience that I got and when it got to the point to do very high stakes translation, translating documents for court or interpreting during legal cases when I was working as a paralegal. I think a lot of what prepared me for those moments, that came from actually getting involved in things like the Translate-a-Thon, and in the nonprofit sector. There's such a high need for language services and translation, and I think a lot of times, even if you commit to very little, I think it goes really a long way. And a lot of that experience of actually translating, because translation is a practice, right? It's not the kind of thing that you read in books. It's actually something you have to do yourself, like going to the gym. And that applies for like language learning. I think when I was in my time in Michigan, and I did that too, when I was like taking Portuguese, you assume that just because you're fluent in a language, that means that you know how to translate. But translating is actually an entire new skill And so is interpreting. And, even in interpretation, there's different types of interpretation. So I think volunteering is important not only to get that foundational experience of making mistakes and getting feedback on your translations and doing it in a very affirmative and low stakes setting, so that then after you graduate, you can do more high stakes translation and also like build a portfolio of projects you've worked on in the past that kind of showcase that you have experience translating. But I think it's also important for exploring different mediums of translation and interpretation. Again, all of those are very different forms and formats. I've done legal interpretation, and I know like that even like the ethical rules are incredibly different. The role that you play as an interpreter is incredibly, it's just, it's an entire new world. And actually the bar to entry for volunteering is very low. And I think, you can get a lot of really valuable experience and also learning from other translators. You might be able to find mentors. And a lot of what I learned about translation in the old days came from other people. Like I remember I took this like it was the LRC that was offering like a workshop on using CAD tools, which I had never used. And I kind of wish I had spent more time actually learning how to do it, because again, there's such a dire need. But yeah, volunteering is always a great opportunity. I think you get those two benefits: improving your language skills, meeting people, and even, getting that foundational experience early in your career.
So, building off of what Emmanuel said, I highly recommend volunteering, especially for the Translate-a-Thon, and for your local advocacy agencies. I also recommend joining the American Translators Association and going to the conference. They do give student discounts. In fact, I was just there in late October, and I had the opportunity to present a few lectures there about my findings in certain fields. I would also recommend, and professors, please forgive me for saying this, one of the best things that you can do is get outside the classroom. Go talk with as many people as possible. Join that club. Learn about a different culture, learn about a different word, learn about different ways of life. If you have the opportunity to travel, travel. If you have the opportunity to develop a new hobby, develop it. The reason why is because as translators, we have to become experts in every single subject. And a lot of that involves hours and hours of research on things that you might have not known about before you got the assignment, but suddenly you have to learn about it on the job and become an expert in it and become an expert in how to use those references in order to convey the message that the client is looking for. And it's not just limited to theory. You can really only do that kind of thing if you have a breadth of knowledge about a lot of different subjects. So like I said, get out of the classroom, make friends. A lot of times those friends become colleagues later on. Socialize, learn about why people think the way they do, and just get out there and learn as much as you can.
I would just like to jump in really quickly to say Emmanuel and Chelsea touched on it, but I just want to make it, and I think in my view, a little more explicit, is like networking, which I know networking always sounds like a chore, but especially in this field, and again, going back to having those people skills, those interpersonal skills, and just having relationships, it really helps. I mean, I Emmanuel is one of the reasons why I also work at the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center, because I saw he was working there and I said, "Ooh, that seems like a cool job." Um, and someone else encouraged me to work in immigration. And so, um, especially while you are at the university and you have access to so many people, and I'm telling you guys, being a student is the greatest excuse to reach out to anyone you're interested in talking to. You say, "Oh, I'm a student in this field and I'm very interested in this. Do you have any advice?" Or maybe 10, 15 minutes to uh, have a quick chat or to meet up if you're in the same city. It's the greatest excuse ever, and it's the greatest time to network, because it just is. And so just building that network, because also even if you're unsure of what you want to do in this moment, you'll meet people who are doing things that you might be interested in, and you can get more insight and learn, oh, that seems really cool. I'm interested. Oh, I didn't know I could do this. Oh, I thought this was something that I was interested in, but actually now that I've heard from someone who works in it, this doesn't really seem like my vibe. Um, and yeah, that's the only thing that I would like to not even really add, but I think make a little more explicit.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And actually, again, that is a great segue to our next question, which is for Kelsey and Omar. So what's your advice on securing your first paid role, either as freelance, researcher, or with a company, and the networking methods that you think actually work today?
So going off of what Peter said about networking and reaching out, um, if you reach out to any translator and say, hey, can I have your opinion on something? Do you have 15 minutes to tell me a little bit about the industry? That's a really great way to build those relationships, because maybe later on they'll have like a little job for you. Maybe like they'll need a proofreader and can use you. I can't tell you how many times I have gotten jobs just by showing up. For example, I lived in Brazil after college, and so there is a Brazilian festival here, which is made up of the Brazilian community in Chicago. And I went a few times, I advertised my services, and that ended up landing me a job at Google during the Brazilian election. And it was all because I knew the right person and I knew how to talk to the right person. So really learning those soft skills, really learning how to be genuinely interested in other people and not being afraid to just ask. I mean, just like with language learning, you kind of have to be a little shameless and not be afraid to be embarrassed, because you're going to mess up at some point. You're going to say the wrong word. It's the same thing where you just kind of have to like network your way and speak with as many people as possible. And who knows, you might be able to get a job because both of you like art history or play golf. That's not just true for the translation industry, but just in general, it's true for work, no matter what career you decide.
Great. And I'm told that Omar is offline now, so he must have gotten called away. But that's fine. Does anybody else have anything to add?
I can add one thing. If any students do want to reach out to me and have any questions, this has been a field that I've been working in for over 10 years. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions and just chat. You guys are the future. We need more visibility within the translation world, and we can only do that if we talk to each other. It is always, not just with me, but with all of the translation community, it is always community over competition. And translators are more than willing to help. So if I can't help you, I'll point you in a direction to one of my colleagues that might be able to help you more.
I would like to add something just
Sure.
briefly that I think you would also be surprised when I think part of it is like, especially if you are a freelancer, thinking about not only your abilities as a translator, but again, like going back to the interpersonal skills is customer service, right? Because at the end of the day, you want people to have a positive experience with you, not just like the quality of the product you deliver, but making sure you're being attentive to the needs of your clients. And like the few freelance stuff that I've done, sometimes surprises me that every now and then I get a WhatsApp message of someone saying, "Oh, so and so recommended your services, and I was wondering if you can do this for me." And that's actually how you kind of make sure that that opens that that door stays open, and gets that little network that if that person has a positive experience, the chances that they will tell their friends, "Hey, if you need a translation, you can reach out to this guy," are greater. So always that is not only the technical aspect, but also how you, treat people.
Not to mention, you can always tell people, hey, do you know anybody else who can use my services? Or if you were, what I always end the conversation with when I finish a job is, if you or anybody you know needs these services in the future, please let me know. And that's honestly gotten me a lot of business. Most freelancers, it's all about referrals.
Great. So we've been talking a lot about translation as a practice and gaining experience and skills. And I think something that I've talked with some people about recently is developing confidence in students. And I think, gaining experience, actual hands-on experience is one way definitely to gain that confidence. So for our last question, which is for Peter and Emmanuel, what is your recommendation to the language departments on one key course or skill to emphasize in the curriculum to better prepare students for today's market?
So, sorry, Emmanuel, did you want to go first?
You go.
So, um, I think something that the university, I'm sure universities do, but at least at the University of Michigan, when it came to classes, I feel like something that was less focused on was the interpretation side, which I know we're speaking about translation, but interpretation is equally as important. And that is something that I believe, at least for the moment, will be less impacted by the developments in AI. And interpretation, sure, even we've already know, or for a lot of people here, I assume already know that just because you speak a language doesn't mean you can translate. And the same rule applies. Just because you can translate doesn't mean you can interpret. It's a whole nother skill set. It involves thinking much more quickly. It involves preparing in a different way. And I think that's something that departments at the university should really um, consider and trying to develop or include at least in their language courses. Um, Perhaps also going back to my general thoughts on what might happen with the field, getting students used to capped machines instead of there being an option, like an optional event at the LRC to learn about them, maybe including them in courses, teaching students how to use them, teaching them more proofing skills rather than, you know, producing on their own and then editing on their own. Perhaps they produce and then they can evaluate each other's work. And then going back, sorry, I know you said one thing, but these are multiple things that I thought of. But going back to the networking thing, I think if I think teachers should, or I think teachers, the universities, the departments should try their best to help students, to push them towards that networking, to help them um, find people in the field that aren't just in the university system, but people outside of academia who they might know. I think academia and theory and research, and obviously that is very important, but for perhaps different students or who want to go more outside of that academic bubble, being able to be introduced to someone who maybe started in that academic translation area, but seeing them now applying it more, using it in their everyday job. I guess a little bit what this panel might be like, but can like helping students meet those people, um, or finding more events that are not just academic talks specifically about uh, you know, theoretical problems or these issues in translation, which I find very fascinating and I enjoyed every second of it when I was there. But I think students would also like to see some more of that like practical side when it comes to theory and practice.
May I jump in real quick? Um, So going off of what Peter said with the interpretation, I 100% agree with that. We desperately need medical interpreters and court certified interpreters, especially now, given all of the changes that are going on. Not to mention the Middlebury Institute, which was the biggest interpretation school and turned out hundreds and hundreds of State Department translators and interpreters, is unfortunately closing, and that gap really needs to be filled.
Yeah, and I mean I agree with that's what I had in mind, the computer assisted translation, and thinking I think the elephant of the room again is AI, thinking about how to critically engage with AI, and especially in the legal field where there's such great need for language services, right? Increasing productivity would mean that a lot of people get access to justice. And I think we're a really good example here at the University of Oxford. They launched 2 weeks ago called the Institute of Justice for Justice, and they had basically chatbots that are fed legal cases, and this is like reviewed by humans, of course. And it's meant to actually help advocates learn about like specific areas of the law. And I was thinking about how, that's the same concept could be applicable to translation and interpretation, and even people who volunteer to translate, but that maybe don't feel as confident with the terminology. That could be a really great use of AI to learn those concepts. I think the other is skills that universities already teach, like research, right? Research, but think creatively about how to bring that to the area of translation. And especially in the area of legal research, like so much of that I learned the hard way that it depends, for example, on whether countries are civil law or case law, and kind of what that difference does to the terminology. And a lot of times, if you're translating between English and Spanish, you will find that. And it takes like actually quite a long time and a lot of practice to be able to tell the difference. But I think having really good research skills can get you very far. And yeah, so also thinking about how to look up words in context and how to think about how to learn about local dialects and where you can go on the internet to find that information, how to use dictionaries, all of that stuff that technically, we have a general sense of what research is, but make it applicable to the work of translation. And I think the last one I have here is negotiation skills. Actually, one of the hardest moments of my experience as a translator was knowing what to charge people for my work. And Julie knows this. Like, I ended up asking a lot of people, and I was very. It was actually really hard to, because whatever number I came up with, it felt like I was being too assertive, or that I was asking for too much. So all of those practical things on how start that conversation in a way that feels fair for you and your client. And also going back to the networking part, right? Like a lot of the way that I approached that question was just asking around and asking people, do you know anyone who practices as a translator, and do they know how I might be able to charge? So all of those things. I mean, the last one is, which I think it was a big component of the minor in translation studies, is thinking about the ethics. And different kinds of interpretation and translation have different sets of rules, but always thinking critically about how your work impacts others, and kind of the power that comes with you becoming a translator especially in the legal field, the power that you have over someone's story. And if you think about the implications of that, sometimes it's really terrifying. So being aware of the implications of your work and how it impacts other people, I think is really important.
All right, I'm gonna just jump in because I was also thinking that something I think is important is to mention those ethics, and especially in this new context of like AI, machines, and computer assisted translations, and thinking specifically of things like privacy of data. How can you protect sensitive information if you're working with clients, if there's in the legal realm? Um, Last year, actually, the Translate-a-Thon keynote speaker went into a lot of detail about this. I'm not sure if that recording is still out there or exists, but if it is, I think you should all go check it out. But keeping things like that in mind, perhaps also working on these other contextual, or thinking about these other contextual areas with students, such as, the politics of translation. As Emmanuel was saying, the way you can translate something gives you so much power in terms of like the words you are using, the context you are giving, the emotions you're imputing on to your work. And those contextual things, as he was also saying, like common law versus civil law and civil systems, etc. I know my students have tons of difficulties with that because France is a civil code system, whereas, because we're trying to get them to use English, we're teaching them English common law, and they're struggling so much when it comes to certain things. But yeah, so I just wanted to add that because he said some very interesting things that I do think are very pertinent.
Great. I want to point out that Julie posted the link to the video for the keynote from last year, if anybody is interested in watching that. If anybody wants to jump in and respond before. Okay, so at this point, I would like to open the floor up to the panelists to ask the other panelists some questions that they might have for each other.
I have a question for Kelsey. I'm just wondering, what are maybe the joys and the pains of the work, the translation work that you do? What do you enjoy, and what is it that you don't enjoy so much?
So, joys. I think one of the biggest joys of translation is the ability to give somebody a glimpse into the world or into a world that they would have no other way of understanding. So a lot of what I do with culinary translation is tell the stories of these centuries old foods and centuries old traditions that have been carried out through different ingredients. And through culinary translation, I'm able to tell them, like, so this is what you're eating, but this is the whole story behind it. This is why these ingredients were used this way. This is how these ingredients were used this way. Um, this is like what you get from that, and this is why this tradition is still being preserved. I think that there's a real joy in being able to explain to people, like, this is the context behind what you're seeing. This is something that you might have not known about before, but now you have the ability to learn more, and maybe that leads you to learn more about different parts of that topic or different ways of approaching what you already know. So that is hands down like one of the best parts. I would say one of the biggest pains, a couple of them. I would say that one of the big pain points I have is that people don't really understand what translators do. They think it's just like X number of words in, X number of words out. And it's kind of like a layer cake. People see it as this, they only see the frosted version of it. They don't see the, 5, 7 layers, all of the different flavors, the recipe, the development that went into creating that cake. And unless you, as the translator, slice that open and give them a piece of the cake, they will have no idea. So like I said, I think translation visibility is just so important because we were taught for a long time to be invisible, and now we're ending up impaling ourselves on our own sword because nobody knows what we do. And we do the coolest thing. We have the ability to not only help empires rise and fall, but we have the ability to connect people who would otherwise not be connected. And what is cooler than that? So, and I think another pain point, just like day to day, is when there is no word in English for something. And so I have to cross reference 7 different dictionaries and then ask colleagues who speak both languages or maybe only speak one language and still sit with the unsatisfying discomfort afterwards of English just doesn't have that word. So
That was both a delicious and empowering metaphor. Thank you.
thank you.
So we have a question from a panelist to all the other panelists. So there's been a lot of talk within the translation industry about a lack of visibility and representation of translators because we've traditionally been taught to be invisible. So what can translators do to increase their visibility to non-translators and illustrate how invaluable your role is?
This is something that I think not perhaps a single translator could do, but that might take um like a collective translator push, and that's kind of entering the culture more. I think for the first time in my life where I saw translation and the idea of translation and the topics of it and everything that went into it, um, break into the mainstream was a few years ago with the release of the book Babel by R.F. Kuang, which, by the way, I think is an amazing book. If it's one of my favorite books of all time already, for those of you who haven't read it. But I think that so much of um, making things known nowadays is through catching attention in cultural moments because of, social media um, and the accessibility of it, that to kind of gain this recognition. I mean, I can sit here with Kelsey and Emmanuel, Julie, and everyone else here and talk about how much we love translation and how we understand the intricacies and that there is so much more to it than what meets the eye. But unless we can package that in like an easy way and make it culturally relevant um, for so many people, there's always going to just be this misunderstanding or this oversimplification of it from the outside. I mean, I even think with my family who knows that I study translation, that to them, they're like, "Oh, can you translate this like document in like 5 minutes for me?" And I'm like, "Well, usually takes, it's not just words." And they're like, "Okay, I'll just use Google." And I'm like, "Well, no, no, don't just use Google. Like you can start to get some ideas, but then you need to anyway." And so I think making it something that is cultural and interesting to people, putting it in the pop culture and the spotlight, um, would just help translators get that recognition and that understanding from other people. And I think also help them realize how important the human aspect of it is, because right now people think it's so easy. Like I said, just Google Translate, ChatGPT Translate. That's all you really need.
If I could jump in on that, I think you put it beautifully, Peter. I think for me, the way we make translators more visible is to make bilingualism more visible and multilingualism more visible. And I think I see a world in which, I think increasingly so in the United States, um, or at least, I mean, I speak for myself, right? Like to make that visible that English is not my first language. And kind of something, this anecdote I have is 3 years ago, I went back to Mexico where I grew up, and the taxi driver asked me where I was from, and I said, "Oh, I'm from here." And he said, "But you don't sound from here." And I remember just being so outraged. My blood was boiling. But I think about the fact that the way I sound actually talks about who I am, and why would I want to conceal that, right? So now I went from like try to be really invisibly like monolingual speaker, think about like how can I silo my languages, and instead think about creatively about how they intersect and combine, and kind of the richness of that, and to make that visible and to encourage other people to make it visible. And I think about myself as an immigrant translator, and even when I went to the courtroom, right, it's something uh, that made me feel very self-aware. But now I see it as actually the gift of like knowing what that experience was like, and the ability to help other people is because I have this valuable experience that not a lot of people have. So seeing it as an asset, I think, is the kind of the first step.
So now I think we can move on to some audience questions. I see there's a few in the chat. And I do want to point out that we are technically at time pretty much, but I have no hard deadlines that I have to be going anywhere, and I don't think our panelists do either. So I'm fine hanging around for a few minutes and letting the audience ask their questions. The first one we have is, I have a general question that any panelist is welcome to answer. Are there any ethical dilemmas that you have faced as a translator, and how did you tackle that?
Just briefly, when I was a paralegal, a lot of times it would happen that the court didn't find an interpreter, right? So I went from being a paralegal for Merck to being an interpreter for the court. And the role actually shifts because you're no longer an advocate, right? You're there to translate what your client is saying. And a lot of times clients say things that don't necessarily help their case, and you still have to translate it. So I don't think it's like necessarily a dilemma, but it's a tension that it was just really hard to resist. And sometimes you just have, it's your job because the role is different and you don't want to break that trust that you have with the judge.
So, I would say both when I do interpretation and translation that those kind of ethical dilemmas are something that we deal with pretty constantly, especially when you're dealing with investigations and you have people who are hostile witnesses and they're just like, well, interpreter, what would you do in that situation? Then your role is just say, like, I am not here to editorialize or provide my opinion. I am here strictly to tell the other person I cannot do anything else. Um, I think that in terms of translation, one of the hard ethical dilemmas that that a lot of translators face is how to convey as much of the information as possible and what exactly that means. So a lot of the cultures that I work with are what are called high context cultures. Basically, that means that the communication tends to be more implicit, more indirect. It tends to be a way to it tends to be more collective. The way that people refer to themselves and refer to others is different. So there's a lot more reading between the lines. There's a lot more like something may mean one thing on the surface, but it could have 10 different meanings. And so the question of like when to stop and when to clear your conscience is a constant battle. A lot of times if I have questions, I always ask my colleagues how they've handled situations like that before.
Okay. Another question we had is, what are your best tips for learning many languages if you can't live in the countries where those languages are spoken?
I think the best thing to do is to, well, there's two things. Whatever opportunities you have to actually use it in person with native speakers or immigrants, take it. For example, I studied Spanish. I started in middle school. It wasn't until I got to U of M that I really had the opportunity to really practice because I volunteered with Palma the, to teach English to immigrants from Latin America. And so I was able to actually start using my Spanish. So if you have the opportunity to meet people, put yourself out there to use the language, if you can do it in a volunteer setting, so you can also help someone else out while you're helping yourself. I think that's always a bonus. If that is not an option, then you just consume media. You can read articles, you can use social media, you can watch movies, you can listen to music, you can watch videos. I think one of the best things that I did to help me learn or get better at listening and my oral language skills is to watch things in a different language and then to still put the subtitles in that language, even if my level is not that high. Because even if I don't know what the words they are using mean, I get used to hearing how things should be pronounced. And then, through context, especially if you're watching something, you can kind of figure out what's happening. So you don't really lose out. So those are my tips.
Okay, so another question we had is, what are your thoughts on using AI, not as a translator, but as a critical mirror for developing skills, for instance, by comparing your own translations against AI-generated versions for analyzation purposes, syntax, sentence structure, etc.?
I'll also briefly, I guess, respond to this. So I think at times it can be a useful tool to kind of get your brain going, especially if after you've exhausted so much work trying to find this unique phrase that you've tried to research and you've found nothing. So like I will admit it, one time I was taking one of the Arabic translation courses at U of M, and there was this one phrase that like, no matter how much I tried, I could not think of anything that made sense with what it was saying, with the literal words. And so I was like, okay, let me see what AI suggestion is. So I put it in Google Translate to see what potential ways it would have translated it. And then I would put it in that context. Um, and it can be helpful because I will say then that day when we shared our translations in class, I was the only one who had the correct translation in the end of that specific phrase because I looked at what the multiple different outcomes according to AI could have been. But I don't know how much I would use it to proof your own work if you are confident in your work. Because one thing that AI does, and if you've ever used, you know, like ChatGPT to check something for you, is no matter what you tell it, even if you say, I just want you to check if the grammar is correct, it will check and then it will be like, here are some edits that I suggest. Or would you like me to give you a new version that does this, this, and that? And so I would just be wary because even when you may not want it to, even if you might just want to check, it one might not understand the context, and two, it might just start suggesting whatever it wants anyway, because it's always programmed to just put something out.
Thanks. So another question we had was, with the current development of large language models, can the method or approach of how AI processes language provide a new perspective in translating or linguistics? Yeah, if
Yeah,
nobody has an idea, I think this is a technical question in some respects, right? About the way AI is trained and modeled, perhaps. So if we don't have any answers to that, we can move to the next one.
I'll just sorry say like my only thought, like I can't really give an answer. Like I'm sure it could, but I think the inherent issue with like the development of AI is we don't really fully understand how it works. So I think it's very hard to, you know, take a guess at what this perspective might be.
Mhm. Yeah, there's the the black box problem of language models sometimes. Another question regarding translations, do you believe that translations should be extremely similar to the original, or should they deviate from the original to show creative expression?
Ooh, great question. Um, uh, this is where the critical thinking and the communication skills come in. So when it comes to a legal document, you want it to be as close to the original, and as close as like you want every single unit of meaning translated exactly how it's supposed to be. Make sure that everything is grammatically correct unless something is said by the original witness in a way that's not grammatically correct, and then you add the little parentheses SIC. But with that, uh, when it comes to legal documents, academic records, academic journal articles, scientific stuff, no creation. Now, when it comes to things like localization, which is a lot of what I do, where you are taking material and not just translating it, but also tailoring the message to a specific market. Yeah, absolutely. You want that to be creative, and that can go as far as using different expressions, finding the closest equivalent cultural reference. In fact, I just sat in on a session at the ATA conference run by the person who did the subtitles for the Oscar-winning movie I'm Still Here, and she talked a lot about her struggles and how she solved certain cultural references that can only be found in Brazil at the time, and then adjusted them for a native English-speaking American audience. So I would say that if you have something where there is a creative translation, you always want to ask the author, or ask the client, how much can I actually do? What kind of cultural references and cultural equivalents need to be made? Only then can you do it, but you always want to be very careful, especially when it comes to certain types of translation where you're dealing with the original author. They can be very sticky about wanting things to be a certain way, and even if it's wrong, you got to translate it the way they want and let them face the consequences. You can warn them, but at the end of the day, like, they got to, like, if it's wrong and they refuse to believe that, that's not your problem.
Great, thank you. So I think we probably have time for one more. Do you believe, so how do you see translation functioning not just as a linguistic act, but as a way to build community for immigrant populations?
Yeah, I would say so. When I was working on with the Department of Comparative Literature on the project of Translating Michigan, and I was talking to members of the community, I think one of the things we identified was that the Latino community felt really invisible in the city of Detroit, and that can be said for a lot of the community across Southeast Michigan. So I think there's like very small acts that actually translation can play a role in making the community feel visible. And one of those things is through murals. If you drive around Southwest Detroit, you'll see many of them. And a few of them actually have messages in English and Spanish. And I think it's a way to kind of mark the fact that the community has been there for a long time, even if so much of the story is divided into this like black and white narrative. And that part of, I mean, languages are about communities. You cannot have a language without community. And I think what translation can do is actually bridging the gap between those communities, not only thinking about, because we always think about like this top-down approach to translation where we're making, services accessible to immigrants, but also thinking about the other way, right? Like, how are we showcasing those communities to the other communities across Michigan and to give visibility to multilingual communities? So I think we always have to think about kind of that dual role that translation plays.
I think too that in terms of building community and really including and incorporating immigrant communities, not just amongst themselves, but also with other populations, that becomes especially important in cases like voting and like having voters really understand their rights and giving them as much access as possible to understand what's on the ballot and what they're signing for. So, for example, when I served as an election judge here in Chicago, there were a large community of Vietnamese people who didn't speak English. And unfortunately, we didn't have enough interpreters. And so I ended up calling the local Vietnamese center and having a couple of people volunteer and interpret the ballots. But I think translation, especially since we are becoming a more diverse population with more communities, it's only going to become even more important because you're opening up so many different markets, you're opening up so many different ways to incorporate these communities, but also to make people more integrated citizens of this country.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I think we can close everything out. I'm going to remind everyone that the panelists have encouraged people to reach out to them if you have any more questions or probably even just want to talk.
Yep. So I would like to give a big hand to all our panelists. Thank you very, very much. And as everybody knows that this panel is the opening of our annual Translate-a-Thon. So if you're joining us for the following event, please stay in this room. We will start working with you to get you started to translate with us. Thank you.